Thank all of you for joining. I'm Philip Rosebaum. I'm the SDSU Extension IPM Coordinator and Field Technician for Dr. Varenhorst, the State Entomologist. And today I'm joined by two speakers, Laura Edwards, our State Climatologist, and Gared Shaffer, our Weeds Field Specialist. So this is our first Pest and Crop webinar Q&A, and we plan to have this every week, every Thursday starting at noon until late or mid-August, or until those topics kind of dry up. And the announcement for every Thursday will come that Monday before in the newsletter, just like this one. So just look for that. It'll always have what speakers and what topics will be covered then. Some basics for this webinar. The Q&A button you'll see is at the very bottom of your Zoom window. Click that and a Q&A box will open. So if you have any questions anytime during the presentation, type your question into that Q&A box, and either Laura or Gared will answer that after their presentation is over. The second thing is the CCA credit QR code will be shown on screen at the end of the presentation and during questions. If you want that half CCA credit, please scan that QR code with your phone. So with that covered, our first speaker today is Laura Edwards, our state climatologist, presenting Early Summer Climate Outlook. Take it away, Laura.
Great, thanks, Phil. Yeah, so I'll spend the first 20-25 minutes or here so reviewing our current conditions, where we sit right now as of mid-May, and what we're looking forward to for the coming weeks to a couple months or so to kind of get us to midsummer. So I'll head right into it. First, I'll start with kind of a funny picture of maybe the kind of starting spring season that you guys have had. One of my kids made this for a project for school with a giant hand sanitizer mock-up with a loader. So just kind of a coronavirus joke there. First, we'll look at temperatures, and then we'll look at precipitation moisture next. Here we're looking at departure from our average temperature for the last 60 days. Oops, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. There you go. For the last 60 days. No big surprise. We've had cooler than average temperatures pretty much statewide. Those blues and greens are, somewhere from near average, just slightly below average to 4 degrees or so. The blues, you're looking at 4 to 6 degrees below average for the last 60 days. Granted, within that time, we've had a lot of ups and downs. It seems, almost every week we get a pattern change every week to 10 days of cooler and warmer and cooler and warmer, as we're going to see here coming up here over the weekend as well. All that has translated into soil temperature, and now that we've thought out the profile, which took a little bit of time this spring, temperatures in the soil, and this is 4-inch depth under bare soil. They've really cooled off, a week and a half or so ago, 2 weeks ago. We were looking at temperatures pretty solidly in the mid-50s, almost pretty much statewide. So, as we see multiple days consecutive, we saw a lot of sub-freezing temperatures over the weekend. That's really dipped down our soil temperatures. They're responding to that. But the good news is, with the warmer temperatures that are forecast, warmer air temperatures that are forecast, our soil temperatures should rebound pretty quick along with that as our average. It kind of responds to daily average temperature, and so these soil temperatures, I'm sure, will get back up in those mid-50s pretty quick. And you guys probably know, too, 50 degrees is kind of the magic number for best corn germination and emergence. So that's kind of a target number we like to look for. And you see that everything in the green is 50 degrees or warmer. Anything in the blue is in the 40s. And this is updated every day on the Mesonet website if you're interested at mesonet.sdstate.edu. And you can look at the real-time temperatures too, although you see a lot of variability during the day if you look at the current temperatures. I've had a lot of questions lately about the frost, the cold temperatures we've seen over the last weekend, especially, and is this average, is this normal for this time of year? And the answer is yes. Actually, we kind of nailed it straight on our, what we call our median last spring frost day. So you could see a lot of those, let's see if I can use my cursor here. The yellow color, you get to May 10th or 12th. This light orange color is May 6th through 9th, which would have been last weekend. And this is the median date of the last spring frost. So historically, about half the last frost occur earlier and about half the frost occur later. So this is about the middle. That's the 50th percentile. So that's right about where I think our last frost will have occurred. We were just spoiled by, you know, the warmer weather that was just a week or two prior to this, where we had some really nice warm, dry conditions, and we were enjoying spring for a while before we kind of jumped back to winter for a few days. So, yeah, it was kind of a normal spring frost. We've been spoiled lately with a lot of the more recent years. We've seen earlier dates for our last spring frost, and so we've kind of maybe become accustomed to more dates in April, for example. But really, this isn't unusual to have a spring frost, our last frost, be in May. Just to take a look at what the 75th percentile would be like. So this would be 75 out of 100. Say 75% of the frost would occur before this date on this map. And so you can see that pushes you into mid-May as you get into the greens and blues in the northern areas and western areas. If you're down in the southeast, still in May is the 75th percentile date for the last frost. So for a late frost, it's still not unusual to see that in May in this time of year. But again, as I said, we're looking at a warmer pattern. So I'm crossing fingers and pretty optimistic that we're beyond what our last frost will be now at this point. So kind of changing tracks over to the precipitation side. This is looking at percent of average, again, for the last 60 days. So I'm just trying to capture here the early growing season since about mid-March. You can see the warmer colors in the red, oranges, and yellows are below average for this for the last 60 days. The greens, blues, if you see any of those, are wetter than average for the last 60 days. So you see a few spots in the northeast now that are in the green, just slightly above average. I think a lot of those areas were dry up until last week, where they got about 2 inches of rain. That really just kind of bumped them up into the green above average area. But I see a lot of folks there in the east central part of the state, southeast, and also the far northwest, and some spotted areas in the west that are tending on the dry side, maybe half or less of rain or moisture in the last 2 months. We haven't been too concerned about this because we had so much soil moisture carryover from last year. We had a real heavy early snowpack that also contributed to soil moisture and water early in the spring season. So the way I see it is that these drier conditions in general have really worked more to reduce our flood risk, not so much to create drought conditions, given the situation that we carried over from 2019. So on the one hand, this dryness is good news. Up until last week, I was hearing some early reports of shallow topsoil that was tending on the dry side as people were out there planting and finding some dry topsoil. I know some of these areas have received rain or will receive rain here this week, it looks like. So hopefully those shallow soil concerns will be going away pretty soon, at least as far as East River goes. Here's a look at soil moisture from the mesonet, and this is what we call our poker chip map, where you have a stack of chips representing all the sensors from 2 inches down to 40 inches depth at each of these weather stations. So not all of their weather stations have soil moisture sensors, but these are the ones that do, that have any color on them. I'm not showing kind of a change map as far as this poker chip map goes, but those ones in the east and southeast that are more in the green colors in the shallow soils, those were really bright blue not too long ago. So I would say on the trend, we are seeing drier soils, and maybe you guys can comment if you're seeing that too, if you think this isn't really right on. But it still certainly looks like there's sufficient moisture out there. You know, I don't think that's the concern at this point. So you can see deeper layers for a lot of the areas are really in the blues, more wet. There's a couple odd ones, like I'll say the Groton Station. I think there's a weird clay layer or something in the soil there that really separates the last two sensors from the top three. Similar down here, I believe this is Flandreau or something like that. So a couple of them have some funny soil things, but over the most part, we're seeing deeper soil and profile still sufficiently wet, no question about that. This is looking at the change in soil moisture, really nationally speaking. I didn't have a good one for South Dakota, just for us. But looking since the end of February, basically March 1st, up through yesterday, region-wide, we're seeing a drying trend in these orange and yellow colors. In southeastern South Dakota, you see kind of a bullseye there, and also through Iowa into Nebraska. That's southwestern Iowa, southeastern Nebraska. I've heard a lot of comments on the drying conditions this spring as well down there. So certainly we're keeping an eye on this. You know, I hate to bring out the D word, drought, but we are keeping an eye on this. It is possible to have a drought following such a wet year. You know, a recent example of that was this transition from 2011 to 2012. We had a very wet flood record year in 2011, and 2012 turned around into 1 in a 50 to 100 year drought. Not saying that's going to happen, but certainly it's worth keeping an eye on, and we are for sure. So to look at the drought picture currently, this is the U.S. Drought Monitor that was just released, updated this morning. So certainly, as I said, we're having discussions already among my partners across the state and including Extension on what's going on out and across the state. And so for those of you who don't know, I work with a group of people all around the state, including our state fire meteorologist, the National Weather Service, some other state agency people, and I take input from Extension staff and others, including any of you who send me comments on what's going on around the state. And we send all of that information to the authors of these maps pretty much every week now that we're keeping an eye on it. So just so you know, we're paying attention and we're contributing to that discussion for South Dakota. So right now, they've held on to some abnormally dry conditions in east central South Dakota, as I indicated earlier. Less than half of average precipitation last 60 days. Very similar if you go back 90 days or since the beginning of the year. So they're holding on to some of that and that northwestern corner as well. So looking ahead, what do we have coming up ahead of us here? This is looking out 6 to 10 days. This is from the Climate Prediction Center at NOAA. These maps are updated every afternoon at about 3 o'clock Central Time. And You can see on the left there, very strong warming trend coming up in our region, especially if you're in the southeastern part of the state. The very dark red colors indicate the probability of those of warmer than average temperatures, and very high probability, very high confidence in that. Looks like, you know, around Tuesday of next week, some parts of the state there will be pushing 90 degrees or so. So we're going to flip real quick into a summer-like pattern. As we look on the right side, slightly favoring wetter conditions. You know, this week we have a very active weather pattern with on and off scattered showers, maybe some spotty thunderstorms over the weekend. Again, you see the very lightest green color on the right side of the map, on the right side on that map. So not a high confidence of that, but some leanings that way. Just look at the next 7 days total rainfall. This is looking for now through next Wednesday night. Anything in the blue is about 1/2 inch to 1.5 inches or so. So I'll say average statewide about 1 inch of moisture here in the next week. And again, it's coming over, you know, a handful, you know, of events. So I don't think we're going to see any great big deluge. The one exception, the one area in purple way down south, looks like around the Valentine area. Might see a little bit more, but in general, looks like about 1 inch, about 1/2 inch to 1 inch for most of us over the next week. So that will keep the soils relatively wet. So for those of you who are still struggling to get in the field, I know up here, Brown County, it's still pretty wet. This might hold people back for a little while longer. But as we see the warmer weather come in next week, it looks like here it's holding in. This is May 21st to 27th. So starting a week from now through that second week from now, holding on to that warmer pattern, at least in the southeastern part of the state. So hopefully we can get some warmer conditions to dry out some of those persistent wet spots that are giving us a little trouble. Here you see the north central states, Montana and North Dakota, starting to lean on that cooler side as we get just past the middle of the month. So again, there's a little time out from now to then, so things could change, but it does look like that really strong warm pattern is going to move off to the east away from us. And there again, on the right, they're slightly favoring the wetter conditions again. Not a lot of confidence there. You know, May, given the dry conditions we've had, May moisture can be pretty important. It provides about 20% of our annual total of precipitation. So given we had a dry April, you know, get a little bit of moisture in May probably isn't a bad thing. I know it's slowing a lot of people down, especially up north here. But for a lot of other folks, like pasture grass with forage, for example, this could be a critical time. Looking at the May outlook overall, so we're already about 2 weeks into the month, so this is a little bit stale at this point. But they didn't have a really high confidence back then, I'd say, on either the temperature side on the left or the moisture on the right. You could see they were favoring the eastern part of the state, just slightly on the dry side at that time. But again, the white colors indicate equal chances of above, below, or near average, both on the temperature side and the moisture side. So it was a tough call, and I see, you know, we've had some ups and downs, you know, of course. So as we've already seen, and I think they, at least on the temperature side, they probably made a pretty good call on that. We'll see how the second half of the month shapes out, but that's what they were saying a couple weeks ago. At that time, they were also on the fence, I would say, reading their discussion. They were on the fence about potential drought development. This is one of the hardest things in climate forecasting or climate prediction right now is when is drought going to happen and how can we forecast that better? So again, back at the end of April, they were looking at those dry conditions and thinking there might be some drought development in eastern South Dakota. So I think that was a little bit of a bullish forecast at that point. But just so you know, this product is out there. Again, the drought prediction side is really difficult, but they're trying to give it a shot and trying to say something when they can. June, July, and August. So looking further out towards midsummer, again, they have not said really much of anything on temperature on the left-hand side. You know, it's been very consistent, equal chances for the summer, which, you know, we could use a little warmth to encourage our crops to come along by that point. We do have sufficient soil moisture, I think, to carry us through a ways. So if we had some heat, maybe wouldn't be too much of a bad thing, especially given how we're now getting towards the latter part of our planting season. On the right there, you see much of eastern South Dakota, slightly, odds favored slightly towards the wetter side of things. Again, this is looking at all three of those months, June, July, and August overall. There has been some indication that June could be wetter than average coming up. So that could be kind of leaning things in this wetter favor. Again, that's I think a tough call though this summer. I haven't seen anything really consistent over the whole summer favoring wetter or drier necessarily, but maybe some wet periods here and there. So I think they're really, again, trying to give us something to work with up here in the Northern Plains. But I'd say this summer is a pretty tough outlook for them, given again the discussions that they share on their website. All right, that's all I have for now. Just to get us through into mid-season. I know Gared will talk about weeds coming up next. You know, I'm sure with given this information, you guys can kind of piece together, you know, what you might be thinking as far as maybe some potential plant disease. You know, again, we're starting off kind of drier than we thought, but could see some wetness. You know, after this week, what does that mean? I don't know, our crops are pretty early yet. And our soil temperatures, like I said, will rebound pretty quick. So I think seed that's in the ground will come up pretty quick next week as we accumulate those growing degree days in a hurry. This is my contact information. I am relatively active on Twitter and Facebook. So if you want to track me there or follow me there, that would be great as well. If there are any questions, I could take those at this point. Hopefully I'm staying on time. Yep. And I'll share that QR code, Phil. I have that on the next slide if you're ready.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
12:30. Our next speaker is Gared Shaffer. He's our weeds field specialist. And just as a reminder, again, if you have any questions, you can either put them into the Q&A or the chat. They're both down at the bottom of the Zoom window. And then again, the QR code will be displayed during any questions after the presentation. So if you want that half CCA credit, just scan that QR code with your phone. But with that, here's Gared Shaffer presenting weed control on a budget. Oh, you gotta mute yourself first.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yep, good to go.
All right. Yeah, so weed control on a budget. Some could think of that title could mean, well, should I cut back on some practices that we're using in the field to control weeds, or should we be doing something different, a cheaper method? But as you can as we go through the slides here and I talk, hopefully I'll give you some ideas and why we shouldn't probably cut some things, and we maybe should cut some other options or practices that we are doing. So to start out, you got to know what's in your field. So when it comes to resistance itself is always going to be an issue. And then, of course, resistance itself, like this field on the left side of the screen here, this is mare's tail or horseweed, whatever you want to call it, and some soybeans. So at this stage, you're kind of in a disaster mode. It's most of that right there. 50% of the field is probably a mare's tail above the soybeans there. So when it comes to resistance, it's one species of plant that has genetic makeup that has the ability that's resistant to that herbicide over time. Either it mutated or it produced more copy numbers or something like that to be more resistant. So there's no such thing as tolerant weeds. It's just resistant or even more resistant. So it just comes down to resistance. And then tolerance itself, so no weeds are tolerant, like I said, but there are, of course, tolerant species out there that we plant. For example, Roundup Ready corn or Liberty Link soybeans, something like that would be a tolerant species to certain herbicides and their site of action, how they process the herbicide through the plant. So all those plants are taking in the herbicide. They're just finding ways to either go around it and not hinder them or metabolize them in a way that's non-lethal. So no such thing as a tolerant weed species. It's just resistant weed species. So what causes herbicide resistance itself? Of course, it's naturally occurring mutations and develop processes. Like I said, these plants grow that are best adapted to certain practices. That could be a crop rotation practice. If you're doing a lot of warm season crops, you'll probably see a large, more issues with cool season or winter annual weeds because those weeds will not have competition. For example, if you're doing a lot of cool seasons, warm season weeds like that, because there's going to be less competition potentially for growth reproduction of those. And of course, application techniques are not always resistance. Some people will scream resistance a little too quickly. Sometimes it comes down to weather and applying the pesticide, the herbicide in general, in a proper on-label way. And this is a picture of one of the mesonet sites that Laura was talking about. They give you up-to-date information. So if you want to apply on-label, with good weather conditions, it's always good to look at those if there's one close by or a National Weather Service station. So when it comes to weather, time of day, for example, a lot of research has proven that glyphosate has better activity when of course the plants are actively growing. It's warm, sunny outside, not at nighttime because it's a foliar herbicide, so it has to be taken up. So the plants have to be actively growing or taking in water, nutrients, etc. Or application errors could be wrong nozzles used, wrong rates, etc. Something like that. So not always resistance. So always think about it could potentially be something else besides just a resistant weed itself. There are some cases of resistance in the state of South Dakota. This graph has not been updated since like 2012. This is on Weed Science Society's website. You can look it up. Every state has a list here. So in general, we probably could add to this potentially, but we're not aware of it, or it hasn't been brought to our attention yet, because producers have to give those weeds to SDSU, and then we can go along and test those to make sure they are resistant on a 1X rate, of course, whatever's labeled for that area. So for example, here we got kochia and water hemp, the two big ones we're still dealing with. Of course, a lot of that is either it's glyphosate, so Roundup, or it's ALS herbicide. So group 2, it says B2 there. You can point there, I'm not sure if you can see that, but the B2, that means the site of action number 2, ALS herbicides. Those are the big ones in corn and soybeans. That's why we stay away from group 9 and group 2 herbicides for that reason, especially when it comes to kochia. An example of this is research done in Kansas at Kansas State University, where they found kochia. It's a certain population of kochia, so not all plants are going to be resistant in one area. It's usually going to be just some or a group of them. Within that, they found, so this is all scientific terms, grams per hectare of active ingredient. So just to break this down is, so what they found in 2007 is they found a kochia population that was resistant with 9 copy numbers. That's where glyphosate attacks in the plant to kill it. So the more of those you have, the more resistance, as you can see. So this is be around 44 ounces of glyphosate that did not kill the plant. This would have been around, again, 44, and then we're up to 88 fluid ounces, and that plant still survived because it had more copy numbers. So it could metabolize the chemical and live through it. And then they found some later in that same area, and this is again a situation where they were relying heavily on glyphosate to kill weeds on a corn soybean rotation. So this right here, they found in 2012, these populations mutated to 16 copy numbers, and that is around 128 ounces, fluid ounces, an acre rate. So that's a lot, and that kochia plant does look healthy. So resistance is a mutation issue on a population level. And also, so with all these new challenges, there comes challenges with all this biotech that's coming out in soybeans especially. For example, so is dicamba going to be the key? It could be, or some people would say it could be the next glyphosate issue. So some research found a couple years ago in Nebraska, they found some populations of kochia as well. They found also some water hemp, but I'm just giving an example for kochia. So this top one is showing different rates of dicamba. They use Clarity. This is Clarity they used. This is a full rate, so 1 pint, 16 fluid ounces right here. This is resistant population. This is susceptible population. So at a full rate, it should kill it. As you can see here, at a full rate or more, it killed this. And then up here at the top, you see a resistant population. So this is 16 fluid ounces of Clarity, did not kill it. And then they went all the way up to, this is 32 pounds of active ingredient per acre, which equals out to about 256 fluid ounces an acre rate. And this is about 130 or so, 120 some fluid ounces of dicamba. And those are, you can't, on the screen you might not be able to see it, but there's a little bit of green there still. They're coming back. So very high rates of dicamba. That means they're highly resistant population of kochia. And this can happen in other species like water hemp or Palmer amaranth or something like that. So just because we have biotech doesn't mean our answers are solved there. So when it comes to weed control and saving money, we got to realize what's in the field, what's resistant to what. To help with that, when you're coming to pick out what herbicides to pick and either mix, if you're going to do a tank mix, it's always good to look at. IWillTakeAction.com has a great poster. You can't really see it because the way the screen is set up here in the fake background, but there's a poster here on the herbicide. I'd show it to you otherwise. The herbicide classification, you look at it, you can download it on a PDF, or you can ask them, they'll mail you a paper copy, or you come by the Extension Regional Center at some point when we're open in the future, and I'll give it to you for free. So what it tells you is site of action, mode of action, number of resistant weed species, chemical family, active ingredient, and then some examples of products. So just showing, kind of taking a snippet out of there, showing how this works. So if you want to tank mix something and your label, so for example, an Acuron label would have group herbicides. It says 5, 15, 27. So you're tank mixing 3 different sites of action there. That means 3 different areas that will attack the plant. 3 hammers, if you can say that. So 3 different ways to kill it, 3 different bullets. So to show this, so what they do on this poster, they give you like all the pigment inhibitors, which would be 12, 13, and 27 group number. Very popular, of course, Balance Flex, isoflutol, especially if the new GT beans are coming out now. So that's going to be tolerant to that. So you can mix with that site of action, but there's some modes of action. So this is a mode of action right here, and this is the site of action down here. The mode of action within nitrogen metabolism inhibitors, there's only one site of action, that's liberty, glufosinate. So it's only one, but for example, some of them have upwards of 3 or more. And then of course, it goes up from there. But just be aware of what that is on the herbicide label or on the front of the jug. So the more numbers you have, the more sites of action you have, which of course I'll talk about here. That doesn't always mean cheap, especially Acuron. That can get pricey, same with like Lumax. But when it comes to other resistance, there's also cross resistance. There's multiple resistance as well. So cross resistance is when a plant has one process that enables the plants to survive treatment with herbicides from different sites of action. So for example, if they could have been resistant to atrazine and also glyphosate together, then that would be cross resistant. Multiple resistance is more than 2. So you're having multiple resistance. You get in that issue, you got a lot of problems, of course. And that is happening across the United States, not so much in South Dakota. So when it comes to what weed seeds you have in the field and knowing what you have in the field, there's been some talk about prevent plant this year and last year. These are some pictures from 2019 prevent plant fields that did not even get a herbicide application. These pictures were taken in August. It's in multiple different locations in South Dakota. The picture on the left there, that is complete water hemp all across there. I walked across there, all I could see is water hemp in that field, about probably 5 plants per square foot or so. So massive amounts of weed seed going into the weed seed bank. So that weed seed bank is going to be mostly in the first few inches of soils where most of that weed seed is going to hang out. On the picture on the right there, that's kochia. So I think what happened, this producer did last fall, the fall of 2018, they sprayed the border in the fall, or maybe they didn't spring, I'm sure it was in the fall, with something like Valor maybe, or Panther, and that controlled the kochia here, but then the next spring, of course, they couldn't get in there, and that's a lot of kochia. So in those situations, you're going to have a lot of weed seed. So it's always good when it comes to money to deposit money in your bank, but when it comes to weed seed, of course, putting weed seed into that weed soil bank is not good, because you are going to withdraw it no matter what. Just like in normal terms, you're going to have to withdraw money to live. So plants are going to do the same thing. You're just trying to limit that when it comes to weed seeds. So how to decrease herbicide cost? There's multiple things, of course, factors, and I might not even cover all of them, but you gotta weigh the positive benefits of no-till versus the tillage. I mean, even if you're going to be tilling spring or fall, those would knock out some of those winter annuals, but you're going to, of course, decrease your soil health characteristics and, of course, leave your soil open to erosion. And then no-till, you're going to be, of course, you have to rely on chemical weed control or possibility incorporating cover crops or different rotations within that system. So either of those systems are going to use chemicals just because it's per acre basis, it's pretty cheap compared to doing a tillage like they did many years ago. Even though organic guys will tell you it does cost money, steel is not cheap. So when it comes to decreased trips across the field, like for example, if you want to mix fertilizer as a carrier and kind of do both, you got to make sure you know what you're applying and what's on label that you can do. If you're doing, for example, UAN, if you want to do that as a carrier, not going to be good with some herbicides like glyphosate. Glyphosate needs AMS and not UAN. So it's labeled that way for a reason, because AMS has the right chemical makeup to make sure the glyphosate doesn't bind to cations. AMS doesn't have cations, so it can't bind to the water, like for example, hard water, and then has decreased activity on those weeds because of that. But if you're doing like a pre-emergent on corn, yeah, definitely some of those you can use UAN on and do herbicide application with your liquid fertilizer, something like that. That's actually aids in the control of those weeds. And also purchasing, majority of I'll talk about this too in the next couple of slides, but purchasing usually is based on like what's going to cost a per acre basis. And you really shouldn't do that when it comes to weed control. It's not necessarily beneficial to do it that way. And then you could always purchase a generic. Sometimes it's not cheaper to do that. Sometimes it is, just like food. But some of these companies do give you discounts if you're using, like, of course, all their products across the line when it comes to fungicides, insecticides, herbicides, all from one company. You can save some money there or hire it done. That can be pricey, but if you have your own sprayer and it's paid for, definitely gonna be cheaper to do it yourself if you have the labor to do it. But hiring done is definitely not cheap on a per acre basis as well, because you gotta pay for that. They gotta pay for that sprayer somehow. So not always gonna be the cheaper option. And then incorporating cover crops versus no cover. Of course, if you're going to incorporate some cover crops, you're going to have to spray more. But at the same time, potentially you'll have to spray less. And I'll kind of say later, I'll talk a little bit about that as well. So when it comes to weed control, cost per acre, cost per bushel versus and not cost per acre. So we want to be looking at the cost per bushel when it comes to weed control. Other stuff, probably not necessarily going to be the case. But when it comes to weed control, you want to look at cost per bushel, not cost per acre on weed control itself to save money. So with resistant weeds, like I said, the cost per acre will go up because you're probably gonna have to apply more chemical or more combinations of chemicals to keep your bushels up higher. So then what to cut, what not to cut. Residual herbicides and soybeans, definitely not something you wanna cut if you have a lot of resistant issues. Early season weed control is key. You can save some money by mixing your own. Again, if you know what you have out there, what's resistant, what's not, what weed species you have, you can mix your own, because some of these pre-mixes get really pricey. You can get $60, $70 an acre really fast with like Acuron, Lumax, stuff like that can get pricey. But, and of course, maximize weed control will maximize bushels. So you got to think about the cost and benefit ratio of this. So if you have an impact from weeds for reduced yields, you gotta look at your variable cost per bushel, and plus if you're renting, that's gonna add more cost, of course, cash rent per bushel. So if that equals out to like $4 per bushel for all your costs, and you lose 30% of yield, you just increase your cost per bushel around $1.20 per bushel of whatever you're growing. So what you're doing is you might decrease how much money you spend on chemical control and weed control, but at the same time, by doing that, you could be losing yield because of that weed pressure. So it's better. The cost per acre may go up, but cost per bushel goes down with good weed control, because you're going to be losing. If you lose 30% yield loss, that's going to be definitely hindering your yearly income. Incomes, yield, and benefit cost ratio. Hopefully that makes sense. If that doesn't make sense, I can explain it more later down the road. But yeah, so cost per bushel is more what you want to look at, what you're spending when it comes to weed control. So looking at certain crops like soybean and corn, look at soybean here. So if you're looking at GMO soybeans, not conventional, you always want to, it depends of course on what you're doing with cover crops, etc. But if a normal chemical no-till situation, or even if you're doing tillage too, a fall application is going to be helpful, especially if you have kochia or water hemp issues. The big one is kochia because it emerges so early. But if you do something in the fall like Valor, Panther, it's cheap. Good control if you put it down in the fall, if you have some time right before beans, or even corn, you could do that, but beans for sure to control that early kochia. And then relying on a pre-emergent burn down, because you always want to be overlapping, or at least trying to get them to meet in the middle of these residual herbicides to control these weeds, just because your options are getting more expensive the more you have to, of course, apply more chemicals. And then with post, if you're growing, for example, in list, Roundup Ready 2 or Roundup Ready 2 Extend or Liberty Link, Enlist is going to be a good option for people with just water hemp and no kochia. And then Roundup Ready 2 beans, if you have resistance in that, if you have Roundup Ready beans and you have resistant water hemp or kochia, you're basically you're going to be back into the same situation of conventional beans because you can't control some of those with Roundup after post. Even though you should still tank mix that anyways because it's going to control grasses well. But with Extend, dicamba, as the examples I showed you, always be rotating these traits as you can on a year-to-year basis, not always relying on one, because the more you do, the more resistance could potentially happen in the future. Even with Liberty, it's not as widespread, but dicamba, 2,4-D resistance is out there in the United States when it comes to water hemp and kochia, etc. And then also for select counties, it could save some money as well to rely on some of these biotech, these new biotech, some varieties coming out with GT27 chemicals and also Liberty Link GT27 beans. For certain counties in the state of South Dakota that are allowed, it's kind of like a section, you can look on the label from about Pierre area and it goes kind of northeast up through Brown County, Watertown, Webster area, somewhere through there. But yeah, so look for your counties. It's on the label that you can apply that this year. It is available. And that's a HPPD inhibitor that you can spray on that, and control is going to be very good on any broadleaf weed species. So another great way of controlling weeds that will help increase yields. So when it comes to conventional beans, like I said earlier, again, do a fall application if you can to control, especially if you got kochia. And then a burn down pre, you really have to rely on that in conventional beans because the post options is not good. For example, I mean, like I said earlier with regular soybeans, biotech soybeans, you have good options for broadleaf control, early post or post, but not so much in conventional, which you probably know that. But if you do a mixture, something like with Pral H2O, if you can do that in even a no-till situation, metribuzin with like a Valor or Authority product, you can tank mix with those. So you get that 3 options. So the pre-emergent burn down might be pricey, but that will save you down the road. You don't spend more money because Flexstar, Cobra, First Rate, Flexstar and Cobra are going to burn your beans. First Rate could also, and they're all expensive. Nothing's cheap there. But if you have to do that just to save yield, it might be worth it. But I'd always, of course, tank mix those with something like Zidua, Warrant, Dual, Outlook, give you some other broad spectrum control, and also, of course, some residual grass control. But First Rate, again, of course, is not going to be good on kochia or water hemp. Cobra and Flexstar would be, they're just pricey, and they're going to hurt your beans. It's not going to look good, potentially. And then corn, with corn, you can get by with very little compared to soybeans because, again, it's susceptible naturally, tolerant to a lot of chemicals that we have. And there's a vast array of chemicals that you can use. It can be cheap, it can be expensive, depends on what situation you're in. I know guys that are getting by with Harness Extra as a pre-emerge burn down, and then they do nothing else. They may add some dual to if they need to, but there's like nothing metribuzin, nothing else really they add, and they get by with that in some areas of South Dakota. But if you have, and those areas that I'm talking about do have heavy kochia, and that takes care of it just because it has the atrazine in there is a big one. But Enlist Duo can be handy, especially on the east side of the state. So given your high rates of 2,4-D, you can apply with glyphosate or even Roundup Ready beans or Liberty Link. So with that, it's definitely good options with corn. You can get really expensive, like I said earlier. Acheron, I know Lumax, those are anywhere from $40 to $60 some an acre for some of those premixes, but you can go out there and possibly buy some of those and mix it yourself cheaper. You'd have to look at the prices of the co-op or whoever you're buying that from. And so when it comes, I mentioned, so cover crops. So there's a lot of things people are trying out there. One that's probably more mainstream is rye after corn and then going into soybeans, just because there's less disease issues, carryover, and it's easy to control rye before soybeans. So benefits, so instead of Valor in the fall, if you put down rye, there's been a lot of research that's proven you can probably get upwards of 80–90% control of even maybe possibly kochia the next spring if you have rye, a good standard rye growing there in that no-till field that I've seen, at least compared to nothing there, no chemical or nothing like that. So you get weed suppression, soil cover, soil temperature goes down. You get a weed mat like this. Instead of weeds, you have a mat suppressing the weeds. So it's very hard for weeds to get through that. Sunlight can't get through that. It keeps your soil temperatures lower, which in turn hinders your, of course, weed seed reproduction throughout the summer. It can't germinate through that if you get a good mat going. And of course, that can be tough to do as well. And there's a lot of other issues, of course, involved with this. That just because you're going to be doing alternative methods like cover crops doesn't mean you do no management. It actually usually in turn causes more issues with needing more management in those situations. And real quick here, I know time's kind of fleeting here. So there's going to also a lot of prevent plants. So when it comes to weeds, the salty areas, low-lying areas, especially in Brown County and Spink, I see a lot of it. Some other areas as well. If something's going to grow there, usually kochia, I see a lot of kochia in those areas. So better not to plant through that and try to get those areas back into production, or at least growing something that's useful. Some things, this picture, it was given to me down the line. I'm pretty sure NRCS took this, or somebody did, and I got it through Anthony Bly. But it shows that, so mainly these salt issues are caused by, it's a water issue and an excess nutrient issue. So what you're doing is these native plants on this other side of that's not being cropped is metabolizing, using, processing these salts and water. And if you walk out in there, they said they couldn't even see much salt in that area, but of course you could hear where it's being cropped. But you can plant stuff in those areas to give competition to those weeds. Rye, it depends on how bad it is, of course. But rye, barley, some alfalfa varieties are tolerant to salt. Native grasses are tolerant. And it just gives weeds competition. And a program that SDSU and the state of South Dakota is pushing is every acre counts. Will actually pay you to be involved with it. If you're in a county, there are only certain counties in the state they're actually trying to get this involved with, producers involved with. If you're interested in that and maybe getting involved with trying to help those areas, and Anthony Bly is a great resource just for even if you're not in the program itself, just to how to deal with this, especially when it comes to nutrients and soil health. Anthony Bly is your guy. So contact him. Here's his email, or you can just look it up online. But anyway, so that's something else. When it comes to money savings, you got to look at all these different dynamics of weed control. So I think it's 12:59 I have. So I think we're gonna, and if you have questions, I'm in the Aberdeen office as well with Laura, or my cell phone number's right there, 290-6164, 290-6164. Since I'm not in the office, you can get me there.
All right, thank you, Gared. There was one question from Eric. Beans into living rye, then spray glyphosate later that day. Expect less control of the rye in the wheel tracks of either the planter or sprayer?
Yeah, I have seen that issues. I mean, I've seen it in just normal burn down if you're like using some of those Haggy sprayers, because where the tire tracks go right, because they have the sprayer, the boom in front. So I've seen tracks happen, especially in heavy dense weed populations. It comes back right where they drove at. That's a potential. Also, yeah, if you're planting green into rye, there's a potential for that if you're not getting good contact to leaves. But again, that comes down to what's there and how beat up those plants are. So potentially you couldn't get good control. But I've seen also areas where, not in South Dakota, I haven't seen it done, but out east, I've seen people, for example, roll rye, even with a planter, and then spray it after that and get good control. So again, I don't have a lot of experience in that, so I don't know. But as long as you have a growing or a green leaf somewhere to suck that chemical in, you can do it. But again, yeah, you got to have something there to suck the chemical in. Hope that answered the question. I can't, for some reason I can't see the chat, but I don't know how to get out of this.
All right, thank you, Gared. Looks like that's all the questions for your session. Oh, Eric did say, did I hear you correctly? No 28% with glyphosate because of the need for AMS?
Yeah, you got to have AMS. So it's, if I remember right, it's sulfur. So AMS has sulfur in it, and that's what, and UAN does not, 28% does not do that. So you got to have AMS with glyphosate, because otherwise the glyphosate is going to bind your cations in the water, and then it will be definitely decreased control in those situations. So there's a reason why the label says AMS. Cool.
All right, thank you, Gared. Well, that is it for this, our first